Peninsula Corridor is one of the better US routes in TSW, thanks to its relatively busy timetable and a decent service variation, although it is let down by bad scenery and the need to spend even more money to get the mostly complete Caltrain scene. I first reviewed this route in March 2023, and I'm not happy with that original review anymore, so I thought I'd remake it. I'll probably refer to this thing as the Caltrain route in future, because the Peninsula Corridor name is not as memorable by comparison. This add-on was originally released in August 2019, and the version compatible with TSW4 now costs $43.59 NZD on Steam, when it used to only be $37. Weirdly, there was a period of 4 days in February 2024 when Dovetail were offering this route free of charge. I only remember them doing this free offer thing once before, and that was with the severely underwhelming Marseille to Avignon route, and that was towards the end of May 2023. With this pack, you get the 47 miles, or 75 kilometers of track from San Francisco to San Jose in California, a large section of the Caltrain commuter line. But this is not the whole line, as it actually continues a further 30 miles south of San Jose to end at Gilroy. On the face of it, it looks like Dovetail made an odd decision to cut the route coverage at San Jose, but I understand why they did it. Well, this time at least. Because the Gilroy section only gets a limited service of 8 trains a day, 4 northbound in the morning and 4 southbound in the afternoon. There is a complete lack of overhead wires throughout the route, but this is fine, for the main line at least, because the in-game route was made, and therefore takes place, before Caltrain's electrification project began. By default, the route only comes with one Caltrain locomotive and passenger coach type. This is the EMD F40PH-2CAT with Nippon Sharyo gallery cars. The locomotive is always at the southern end, while the cab car is always at the northern end. Caltrain has 23 examples of the F40PH family on their roster, but they are not all the same variant. Only 15 of Caltrain's F40s are designated as F40PH-2CAT, and this means that they had the body shell extended over the rear walking platform in order to accommodate a separate head-end power generator. For whatever reason, Dovetail never added the other 2 Caltrain F40 variants, which are the EMD F40PH-2 and MPI F40PH-2C. The latter would have been quite impressive to see in TSW, since 920, 921 and 922 do not have nose-mounted headlights. The gallery coaches are quite unusual because, although they look like conventional double-decker coaches from the outside, the top deck's floor is more like 2 narrow balconies. This bizarre arrangement allows the guard to check tickets from passengers on the upper level without having to climb up the stairs themselves. Caltrain is not the only operator of gallery cars, as they can also be found on Metra in Chicago, Illinois, and the Virginia Railway Express out of Washington, D.C., amongst a few other operators. When they started running in 1985, Caltrain had 63 gallery coaches, of which 21 were cab cars. 10 more trailer coaches were built in 1986, with another 14, plus 6 cab cars, following suit in 2000. The cab cars are numbered from 4000 to 4026, but I don't recall ever seeing this in-game model appear with the numbers past 4020. Besides the Caltrain F40PH-2CAT and gallery coaches, you also get a Union Pacific variant of the EMD GP38-2 diesel locomotive, and what appears to be a generic hopper wagon. I appreciate the addition of this freight equipment, even though you can't really do too much with this lot. Incidentally, this was not the first time we saw the GP38-2 in TSW, as a CSX variant, with nose-mounted headlights and 2 livery options, comes with the old Sandpatch grade route. We've also got a Canadian National variant with the long-neglected Oakville subdivision route, and a Norfolk Southern variant with horseshoe curve, but Union Pacific is my favourite of the group. I can't show the NS variant in this lineup because I refuse to buy the horseshoe curve add-on. By default, the rail scene on this route looks rather unrealistic. You've got to pay more money for the 2 locomotives that are sold separately, instead of being packaged with the base route. These are the MPI MP36PH-3C and EMD MP15DC, whose TSW4 compatible versions now cost $29 each on Steam. I think it's unfortunate that the MP36PH-3C and MP15DC are sold separately, but when it comes to Dovetail games and their business practices, and to quote a Fresh Cut Slim song, that's just the way it goes. Side note, I wouldn't mind seeing more members of the MP Express family in TSW, with suitable routes of course. The one variant of this family that I really want to see in the game is the Sunrail MP32PH-Q. Caltrain uses 6 MP36PH-3C locomotives, primarily to run their Baby Bullet Express services. These locomotives were built in 2003, and the TSW version comes with authentic Bombardier bi-level coaches to boot. I remember being informed on how these are the Series 6 or Series 7 variants of the bi-levels, so that means they're newer than the Metrolink ones that are said to be included with the upcoming San Bernardino route. As for the EMD MP15DC, she doesn't come with any rolling stock, and just runs with the coaches and wagons that come with the route instead. Caltrain has 2 examples of this design in their fleet, numbers 503 and 504, and they were originally built for the Southern Pacific Railroad in 1974. I don't know enough about the MP15DC to say whether or not the modelling is accurate, but I will say that I like the general look of this locomotive. Incidentally, while I was making this review, I realised that this is the only American end-cab shunter in TSW. As for the MP36PH-3C, I think the in-game model is fine, for the most part, but there's something off about the shape of the streamlined front end. The area around the marker lights is stretched out a little too far, or the angle of the 4-piece windscreen is too shallow. As for the sounds on the Union Pacific locomotive, or the Caltrain locomotives for that matter, I won't comment on whether or not they're accurate due to my lack of familiarity with their real-life counterparts. Instead, I will invite more knowledgeable people to leave comments below and to tell us how good or bad the sounds are. Timetable mode includes 54 playable services for the F40PH-2CAT, 26 for the MP36PH-3C, 25 with the Bombardier cab car leading, 45 with the Gallery cab car leading, 8 for the Union Pacific GP38-2, and 9 for the Caltrain MP15DC. I always found it weird when you're driving in the Gallery cab car, as it looks dizzyingly high up off the ground. But this is coming from someone who has never ridden on a double-decker train in real life, as the loading gauge in his home country is far too tight for that sort of thing. Incidentally, the only double-decker rail vehicle I've ever travelled on is the ex-Wellington tram number 47, which is now preserved up in Auckland. And I just realised that, when riding in these unusual coaches, one could say that they're in the gallery. As one might expect, the GP38-2 barely makes a dent on the rail scene here, but it's still good to at least have the option to run any freight services if you don't want to take passengers every time. Meanwhile, the MP15DC is used to shunt rolling stock in the depot at San Jose, or take ballast wagons up the main line to San Francisco and back. The north and southbound maintenance of way services are both split into two parts. As for the GP38-2, her timetable begins with two northbound services in the morning out of the Santa Clara area. The first train goes to Pier 96, wherever that is, while the second only goes as far as South San Francisco. Both services have their respective return workings late in the evening, but in between, you've got a bit of shunting to do at South San Francisco. One of many things that Caltrain is known for is the varied stopping patterns of their passenger services. You've got local, limited stop, and baby bullet services, and the amount of time it takes to cover the full San Francisco to San Jose section depends on which type of service you're operating. It usually varies between 60 and 100 minutes. I prefer the baby bullet simply because it's quicker, but the other two are more challenging due to the more frequent stops. For this review, I tried driving the MP36PH-3C on Baby Bullet Train 370, which is the 5:16 p.m. San Francisco to San Jose service, with intermediate stops at Millbrae, Hillsdale, Palo Alto, and Mountain View. I found the locomotive to be reasonably challenging to drive, and her physics didn't feel too overpowered. But something I don't like is the overly sensitive throttle and brake levers. It's too easy to accidentally move the throttle into the dynamic braking range when you don't want to use the dynamic brakes. And I advise against doing a full throttle start, since you run the risk of overloading the traction motors if you do that, and the same goes for the F40PH-2CAT. Regardless of what locomotive you're driving, it can be difficult to get used to the brakes, especially if you normally drive European EMUs in this game, and I often struggle to get these things to stop exactly on the marker. Next, I ran the return trip from San Jose back to San Francisco in the cab of a Bombardier bi-level cab car, with an MP36PH-3C shoving the train. The cab car has a somewhat convoluted setup process, which is explained in the tutorial, and yet Dovetail never bothers to do the same for the signals on any of their routes. This was Baby Bullet Train 323, the 7:49 AM departure from San Jose, with intermediate stops at Mountain View, Palo Alto, Hillsdale, and Millbrae. I prefer the bi-levels over the older gallery coaches myself, and I found that the cab car's throttle and brake levers are not as sensitive to keyboard inputs as those in the locomotive. On this northbound run, I mostly had green signals until I got past San Mateo. Then I caught up to a slower train that stopped at Millbrae and South San Francisco, so I was looking out for yellow and red signals until I overtook the slower train at Bayshore. Out of the 25 stations on the section we get in TSW, 2 of them, namely Broadway and Atherton, were only served on weekends, so no trains call there in timetable mode as it uses a weekday schedule. For reference, this add-on was made and released before Atherton Station closed in late 2020, while Broadway is still open today. Meanwhile, trains only stop at Stanford Station when major events are held at a nearby stadium, and if I'm not mistaken, there's a university in this area. The last stop before San Jose is College Park, which consists of nothing more than a tiny shelter, ticket machines, and little paved strips that barely resemble platforms. In real life, this station gets a very limited service of just 4 trains a day, 2 in each direction, and only on weekdays. But for some reason, none of the services in TSW actually stop here. Although the rail scene feels largely complete throughout most of the route, the section from Santa Clara to San Jose is very unrealistic by comparison. In real life, Caltrain shares this section with Amtrak's Coast Starlight and Capital Corridor services, as well as the Altamont Corridor Express to Stockton, none of which have their rolling stock included in TSW. Two more areas that are lacking in realistic motive power are Millbrae and Mountain View stations. The former is also served by the Bay Area Rapid Transit EMUs on 5-foot 6-inch gauge track, while the latter is also a terminus for a branch of the VTA light rail network. Shockingly, Dovetail didn't bother adding overhead catenary on the VTA lines out of Mountain View, which absolutely ruins the accuracy of this station. Another area that looks hideously inaccurate is the street right next to San Francisco 4th and King Street Station, the northern terminus for Caltrain. There should be tram lines and overhead catenary there, as this is where the Muni Metro's N-Judah line runs in real life. But in TSW, all you see is a blank space. I shouldn't have to clarify this, but I do not expect Dovetail to go to the effort of modelling things like the Muni Metro trams, BART EMUs, VTA trams, Altamont Corridor Express and Amtrak rolling stock when you would only be seeing them on short sections of the route. All I was doing was pointing out their absence, and the fact that it results in the rail scene not looking entirely realistic, not to mention the inaccurate scenery at Mountain View. And I don't take kindly to people assuming where my expectations lie. To add, I also noticed that the BART tracks at Millbrae are standard gauge in-game, just with a third rail added. So Dovetail couldn't even be bothered to do the proper 5-foot 6-inch gauge track. The distant scenery is by far the worst aspect of this route. For example, the distant hills in South San Francisco are completely blank, and throughout most of the route you'll find very basic assets and the same house models copied and pasted several times over. Not helping the situation is the fact that a lot of this poor scenery is right next to the track. This really doesn't help the somewhat uninteresting nature of the line south of Millbrae, where there's very little in the way of notable landmarks, and all the tunnels on this route are on the short section from San Francisco 4th and King Street to Bayshore, right up at the northern end. Someone told me that there's a bug with the GP38-2's wheels, saying that they don't turn. I went to investigate this for myself, and I have to wonder why, or rather how, Dovetail could have missed this issue, but I'm not surprised in the slightest that they haven't bothered to fix it. There's probably no money to be made in fixing this bug. Although there is still an elephant in the room, in the form of the crappy scenery, I still recommend the Caltrain route in TSW. This is because it can have a good and mostly realistic rail scene, but only if you've got the MP36PH-3C and MP15DC as well, with a decent mix of passenger, maintenance and freight train services. Not to mention a reasonably challenging driving experience, and I like a challenge, for the most part. Apart from a look at the yet-to-be-released London Overground Goblin Line add-on, this will be my last TSW4 review for the time being, and I'm not sure when I'll return to talking about the game after the Goblin review. In the interim, I'll continue to film trains in real life or review locomotive add-ons in Train Simulator Classic. To be clear, it's not that I don't want to keep reviewing TSW products, especially since Dovetail Games still needs to be held accountable for their myriad of problems that result in them slaughtering their own reputation. But I'm just feeling burnt out from the grind, as it were. If you guys still want honest reviews of Train Sim World content while I'm taking a break from the game, then the Train Guy 4 has you covered.